In this video I'm going to show sheeting a boat. I'll typically do this near the end of the build. Once I have all the internals aligned, sheeting at the end allows me to look through the sides when I'm installing the internals, specifically with guns, because it can be hard to see exactly where contact is if the sides are sheeted. Another reason why I'll do it at the end is because when building the boat, you handle it a lot, and handling it a lot can lead to damaging the balsa by sticking your finger through it accidentally or setting it down on something accidentally. So I'll do it towards the end once all the major work on the inside is done and right before I'm ready to move to sea trials. For this video I'll show the South Dakota here. This is a new build, so this will be sheeted for the first time. One step additional that I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the hull with Gorilla Tape. What this does is it sort of makes a barrier between the hull and the balsa. So the adhesive that holds the balsa on will go on the Gorilla Tape instead of the hull, and that's going to make removing the sides much easier. Either the contact cement, which I use to attach the balsa, will come off the Gorilla Tape much easier, or I can pull the tape off directly. That's easier because otherwise the traditional way is to just use contact cement and put it directly on the side of the hull. But then when you're resheeting, it can be tedious to get the residue off. So I'll start by just covering it with Gorilla Tape. In general, the approach will be to just cover the entire sides. I want to watch out for the stringers and the inset area at the top there. And then I'll use a razor blade and then cut out the windows from the tape. In my experience, this leads to a better end product than just trying to tape individually over the all the ribs. Before sheeting, one of the things I'll do is just make sure the outside of the hull is nice and clean. Mainly I'm looking for bumps of epoxy over the course of the build. You can certainly get epoxy on the side, so what I've done is I've sanded it down, both with a Dremel for larger drips and then just a quick rough pass with sandpaper, and that makes it go on easier. I also remove the rudder because typically in the sterns it can get pretty narrow, so I'll want access to that. Final step, I wiped it all down with acetone to remove any dust. Finished duct taping this one side. I think it came out alright. Pretty much just put them right up against each other. I didn't overlap, so I don't think it really matters. And then covered about 3/4 of an inch on the underside, and then that'll allow some surface so I can put some silk span over onto the actual gel coat on the fiberglass to make sure I get a good seal at the bottom of the hull. Now I'll repeat it for the other side. Here's an overview of 32nd inch balsa wood. When you get balsa wood, you want to find the softest that's available. The reason for having it soft is that means it'll have less resistance as a BB goes through it, which will create a smaller hole. So easiest sort of way to tell is you can sort of bend it, like that, or you can twist it. This piece right here is relatively hard. You can also sort of hold it up to the light and you can see the grain thickness. This is also a pretty hard piece. So I'm using it because it isn't for nationals, but what you can do is I'll use my palm sander and I'll actually sand these down a little bit to make them softer. Sanded down the wood, and the next step will be attaching silk span to the inside and the outside of the wood. What that does is it makes the wood hold better. It also helps seal the wood. So I have some silk span here. This is used for model airplane wing covering, I believe, or at least it used to be. This is what we traditionally used. I'm actually going to try tissue paper for this time. So I have just some generic dollar store tissue paper that I'll use instead, but method would be the same. So what I'll do is I'll cut it into strips that are a bit wider than the wood. So I have 3-inch wood and 4-inch. So for the 3-inch I'll use a 4-inch strip, and for the 4-inch I'll use a 5-inch strip. That gives me a little bit of overhang. And I'll show two methods of attaching it. One is using Super 77. So to do this method, you just spray the wood and then use a credit card to rub the paper into the wood, and then it'll attach pretty well. The other method is using contact cement, and I'm going to use contact cement thinned by MEK. And then for that method, I'll pretty much just paint on the contact cement to attach it to the wood. And then we'll do this for both sides. Start with the Super 77 method. So what I'll do is I'm just going to spray this 2 passes and then put the silk span down. Okay, so now I'll line the silk span up. Now I'll just use the card here to scrape it in. Okay, and there you have it. So I'll just repeat this on the other side, and that's the Super 77 method. It's very quick, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people use it. For the second method, I'm going to use thinned down contact cement, and I'm just going to paint the piece of wood here, and then I'll lay down my silk span, and then I will paint on top of it to attach it to the wood. Okay, now I got the tissue paper on there. And just sort of paint over it. It'll soak through, and with the MEK it'll dry fairly quickly, and then the paper will be attached to the wood. So just go down the length here. This method does certainly take longer, but I think you get slightly better hole quality. Once the balsa is prepped with silkspan, the next step will be to cut the balsa sheets into pieces that will line up with the ribs and the hull. The way I'll do this, I'll usually start bow to stern, and then things I want to look out for are things like stringers or casements, and also curvature of the hull. So this boat has an Atlantic bow, so there's a pretty good curve in the front here. So I'll probably do one piece from the front up to this rib, and then for the joints you'll always do half. For a single rib you'll have, like, the front half of this rib will be the forward piece, and then the aft half of this rib will be the back piece. So I'll measure and cut out a piece for right here, and then I'll probably do a piece from this rib up to about here, mainly for curvature. There's a stringer here, which is decent. So there's a couple options. One would be to just use 2 pieces of balsa, so you'd have a lower piece and an upper piece, or you can just put a single piece and kind of mash it on there. So I'll probably go with the mash method. And then next, with this inset at the top, it's much more significant, so that'll have to be a separate piece. But I can do a piece that goes from here down to the bottom, and then because this continues aft, I can just do a longer piece there and then a small piece up here. And then I'll sort of keep going. For this, the aft section, I'll use 3-inch. You'll want, at least a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch on the bottom here for sealing. So I'll continue a 3-inch piece, up to probably about here where it starts to curve, and then I'll just do one last piece on this aft section. This stern is actually, this will be pretty easy. Some sterns are more curved. This one's relatively flat, so this won't be too bad, but if it's more curved, you might need to go like just 2 windows per piece, or even a single window, because you'll get sort of bubbles with the curves. Alright, so to do this for the first piece, I'll just sort of take my balsa and stick it on here, and then I'll look for where the rib is, so right here, and then I usually make a mark with a razor, so just make a couple marks, and then I'll take this off, and then I'll use a ruler and a razor blade on wood and cut a nice edge, and then the front I can put a little cutout right here for the curvature of the bow. Keys for this are to really make sure the pieces line up really well, because if they're too long, it won't work out when you're doing from one piece to the next, because it won't end up on a rib, or one piece might cover the whole rib and then there's nothing for the next piece to go on. So really checking the measurements and making sure you hold the piece up to the hull when taking the final measurement. Alright, I'll cut out a few pieces and then show what it looks like. I have pieces for the starboard side cut out. Alright, so just show here a little bit. For this first piece, things I'm looking at, I want to make sure the wood goes all the way to the top of the hull, and then also I have good coverage on the lower side, and then that it bisects that rib there. And for the next piece, I'll start from that rib, sort of press it down here, try to see the whole piece. Generally, I'll err on the side of going a little shorter, because when I go to put these on, if they're shorter, they'll still fit in. If they're longer, it can be a challenge when you're putting them on, because they'll overlap, and with contact cement you can't really adjust it, you just need to kind of push it in. So I'll typically err a little bit on the side of caution and go shorter. And then just sort of keep going down. Ended up just going with a bigger piece because that was what was left of the balsa there. And this is a nice flat area on the side. And then a 3-inch piece to make it to the stern. and then the stern piece. The stern piece, I'll typically just do a rough cut at the end, and then I'll sort of round it around so it doesn't overlap with the other side there. Okay, so now this is done. What I'll typically do is I'll mark on the inside of the pieces. Now for the bow piece it's pretty obvious which way is forward, but for these middle pieces it's very easy to lose perspective on what's the inside and what's forward. So I'll typically on the inside just do a forward arrow, and then that will tell you both what's inside and then which orientation it is. So I'll mark those, and then I'll also cut out pieces for the other side, and then the next step will be putting contact cement on the wood and the hull. Now that the balsa is cut, I will coat both the balsa and the hull with contact cement. So I use just regular original Wellwood. We've been using this for probably at least 15 years or so. Before that we used CA glue, and it was a lot harder. So for this step, I'll just really paint the whole contact area. Generally go with a thin coat, just one coat should be fine. If needed, you can do a couple coats on the hull if desired. And then on the balsa, I'll just paint the entire inside side. In the past I used to mark where all the ribs are and just try to paint there, but it is usually fine with a single layer of regular unthinned contact cement. It won't impact the drop test. If you go too overboard on the contact cement on the inside, like put 2 or 3 coats, then it could limit the penetrability of the hull, which is not good. So I'll just paint them. You certainly want to do this outside in a well-ventilated area because of the contact cement fumes. And then once everything's coated, let it dry, usually at least 15-20 minutes. It should be completely dry, otherwise they won't stick together when you go and place the sides on. I coated the balsa and the hull. See, the hull's a little shiny, so just a thin coat is fine. And then likewise all of the pieces of balsa are all dry. So once they dry, I will be ready to put the sides on. The contact cement is dry, so now I'm ready to put the pieces on. When doing this, you really only get one shot or one placement, so usually start on one end. In this case, the more critical end is going to be where the rib is, so I'll start on this rib, and I'll most likely start on the lower corner here, and then I'll have the piece bent, and then I'll sort of lay it down and press it out, making sure it stays in contact. I want to make sure the top doesn't come in contact with the upper rim first, because then I'd get a bubble that's not up against the ribs. Okay, the bottom's down, so I'm just sort of pressing it along the ribs. There we go. Alright, for the next piece, I'm going to make sure it's lined up on this rib first. Also making sure this edge is lined up. Just sort of press it along. See, the pieces go on pretty easy, especially on the flat areas. And then up here, I'm gonna crease it a little bit. Okay, looks like I'm having some issue with the contact cement separating there, so I'll need to put more in on that joint, but otherwise it should be good. Alright, and then I'll just continue along the rest of the hull. Finished sheeting the side of the hull. So next step is I will put one more layer of thinned contact cement and MEK over the outside, and then I'll also put strips of tissue paper, silk span, over the edges between two pieces. So I'll put like a strip right down here and continue aft, and that helps seal it up. And I'll just coat the entire side, which also helps provide additional sealing. Finish coating the outside and putting extra layers over the seams. I also put extra layer on this edge where the inset is. Helps seal both the top of the lower piece and the bottom of the upper piece. And then in the stern, you can see I put pieces all the way around. And that helps seal up the stern area. You can see why removing the rudder is important, because the paper is right where the rudder would be. Okay, so I'll let this dry, and then next and really final step will be just put a coat of paint over the whole hull.